So when we're looking at this roller coaster, we are predominantly looking in that luteal phase as we're leading up to your period. And ideally, you make absolute boatloads of progesterone, milligrams worth. And when I say milligrams, like if you think of your average supplement, you take 250 milligrams of magnesium, you take 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, you should be making 25 to 40 milligrams of progesterone. It's a lot of progesterone. Whereas your estrogen, your estradiol, you only make micrograms, so much smaller amounts, micrograms. The problem is if that changes, if you don't make enough progesterone.
You're listening to the Nutrition World Podcast, a show about navigating the intricacies of holistic wellness. We're a natural health food store located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we believe that optimal health and peak performance should be accessible to everyone.
All right, thank you guys for joining. We are on Nutrition World's podcast, and I am Katie Coleman. I'm co-owner of Nutrition World with my father, Ed Jones, and we are honored to be here today with Dr. Carrie Jones. This is one of the biggest topics I hear in my time spent at our store is on what we're going to speak on, and that is PMS and PMDD. And you may not even be familiar with the term PMDD, but we're going to get into that today and dive into what that looks like. And we want to give you guys hope that this doesn't have to be the way that you are existing. And we're going to go over what this looks like and, symptoms, strategies, and all of it. But before we do that, I want to formally introduce Dr. Carrie Johnson here today. And so she is a naturopathic doctor. She's an internationally recognized speaker, consultant, and educator on the topic of women's health and hormones. With over 20 years in the industry, she is dubbed the Queen of Hormones. And so Dr. Jones is a naturopathic physician who did her 2-year residency focused in women's health and endocrinology. She went on to get her Master's of Public Health and was one of the first to become board certified through the American Board of Naturopathic Endocrinology. She was the first medical doctor for Precision Analytical, which I find so fascinating. So she was one of the creators of the Dutch test, one of my favorite hormonal tests. And she is the first head of the medical education for Rupa Health. She also has a very popular podcast that I love listening to called the Root Cause Medicine Podcast, has over 3 million downloads. And so she's currently Chief Medical Officer at New Ethics Formulations, a company that we love within our health food store. And she is head of the medical education at a Metabolic Mentor University. And so what an honor it is to be here with you today, Carrie. So let's just hop on in and start diving into this topic.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me because I just, as you can tell from my bio, live, eat, breathe hormones. It's what I've been in the last 20 years. And, we were talking a little bit off podcast that it would be so wonderful if we had been taught about hormones at a young age. I was raised in Kentucky, and my hormonal experience, health education, whatever you want to call it, the sex ed class, was taught by the football coach. So you can imagine how that went. And I realized as I went through medical school, residency, and practice, so many women were like, I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that thing about that hormone. I didn't know that's how my body worked. I would have fully menopausal women who have 2, 3, 4 children, and they would go, you know what? I could get pregnant. I just didn't know that. I'm like, how'd you not know? You raised children. They're like, I don't know. Nobody taught me.
Wow.
I'm like, man, this is a disservice because here they are coming into your store saying, I don't feel well. I'm having these symptoms. I don't know what it is. I'm getting blown off. Is there something that you have that can help me? And I'm like, yes. Oh my gosh, there's so much hope and there's so much resource out there. And thankfully, education like this podcast is really going to help.
Totally. And exactly before we hopped on here and we're live, I was even reminiscing as a personal story to myself. I spent a lot of years on birth control pills and thought that was the answer for PMS at that time in my life. So from 16 to 21 or so, and really lived in a place of even worsened PMS once I hit those birth control pills. And that was a very common story among my friends. It's a common story among people that come into our store that, the answer for them when they were saying, I don't feel very well, or I'm experiencing moodiness, I'm experiencing cramping, I'm experiencing heavier periods, was the only answer they received was get on this pill, get on this progesterone, get on this estrogen. And you know, what we practice here at Nutrition World and what you practice all day long is what's the root cause? So is there an estrogen deficiency? Is there an estrogen dominance? Is there progesterone deficiencies? Why are we guessing and throwing a potential hormone at someone that might actually be the opposite of what they really need? What if they're already in an estrogen dominant situation and then they're throwing more estradiols and more estrogen? And so, you know, I think that you're here today to let's just really flesh out all of this. Like, what does PMS look like, and what are symptoms, so that we can start being aware as a female and as a human listening to this, like, oh, hopelessness, anxiety, you know, down and out feelings that come a week before our cycle, and yet we feel that every month and don't realize that maybe that's a little bit dysfunctional or something that we could fix. Let's go over what that kind of looks like.
And I love that you said that, because what happens is it's become registered as common. And therefore common is associated with normal when it's not normal. So when women say to me, just like they say to you, I feel like right up to my period, I am moody, my breasts get big and they hurt, I am bloated, maybe my bowel movements are changing, I'm constipated, or I'm the other way, I have more loose stools. I'm retaining water, I'm craving, I'm crying, or I'm angry. What is going on? And because, again, it maybe is happening every month or so regularly, and because your friends or your sisters or commercials on TV make jokes about it or say, yeah, I have that too, then the disservice to us women is that, well, it's common, so you should just live with it. When in fact, that doesn't mean it's normal. It's definitely, as you said, more of a dysfunction. So I'm sure a lot of women listening are like, yep, checked all of those boxes. I experience all those things, even down to sleep, how we do or don't sleep leading up to our period. I mean, it's the hormonal system is all very intricately tied to every system in our whole body. And because as you know, women, we shift, if you have a cycle, your hormones are actually shifting a little bit every day. And so we are constantly having to micro adjust every day. And if they're shifting, you know, it's like, you know, a little too much or a little too little is going to be a problem. It's got to be that Goldilocks just right for that day for us to really feel good. And so PMS is common, but it doesn't mean it's normal.
Right, right. And explain a little bit, what's PMDD? Because that's the other part of the topic we want to talk about. Yeah. And I don't think that one's as well coined, so people may not register what that is, but it is still common. I hear of it quite a bit. Yeah. Yeah.
So PMDD stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And sometimes it'll get described as like a 10 out of 10 severe version of PMS, but really it's more than that. It really heavily involves the mood. It means, and I have had a lot of patients who've said like their entire world gets flipped upside down with the severity of their depression, the severity of their anxiety, the severity of their hopelessness, their inability to handle stress. They're more triggered or sensitive to any kind of stressful situation. So maybe when they get their period, like those first 10 or 14 days, if something stressful happens, they're like, it's fine, I can handle it. But then as they get closer to their period, they're like, it's flipped upside down. I'm actually considering, you know, having myself admitted, or I'm having to call my therapist, or I'm really struggling. So it can be, it does get advertised maybe as severe PMS. It's not so much like, oh, really bad breast tenderness, or really bad bloating, or, you know, really bad water retention. It's more that dysphoric mood that just completely flips you on your head.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay. So describe to me, so that women listening, maybe a little bit of like body 101 for what is happening with hormones during a month, during a whole phase of a female. Because like you said, you were, you know, taught in high school sex ed, and it was very basic and it didn't go into any of this. I still think that we're existing in our 30s, 40s, 50s and having cycles and still not realizing there's the luteal phase and follicular phase. And, you know, not that everyone has to know every name about all of that, but like, what are the hormones doing during this time, you know, during the 28-day cycle?
I have a joke. A girlfriend of mine is a double board certified gastroenterologist internist. And she's in her 40s, she has kids, and she was making the transition into more holistic functional medicine and away from hospital-based conventional medicine. And so I was working with her to help her understand hormones. And she said to me, can you just give me a quick overview on the menstrual cycle? And I was like, you actually went to medical school. You're double board certified. And she said, I know, but not in that area. Like, I'm in a different section of the body. I don't under like the cycle. I get it. I got pregnant. I have kids, but I'm not totally certain how it works. And I thought, wow, yes, that's so common. Even in medical school, if you're not an OBGYN, it can be a real struggle for everyone to understand. So basically with your cycle, ideally, in theory, according to the books, you have a 28-day cycle. But honestly, you can vary anywhere from 24 to 35 days. And so some months you may be 28 days right on the dot. And other months you may find you're 26 and then you're 32 and then you go back to 26. It just sort of depends on how your ovaries work. And so that's what's considered a normal average cycle length. Okay. The first part of your cycle is called the follicular phase. The second part of your cycle is called the luteal phase. And what decides if you're in the first or the second part is where you ovulate or release the egg, which happens right in the middle. So in the first part of your cycle, that follicular phase, that's when you get your period. So the first day of bleeding, true bleeding, that's considered day 1. So if somebody's ever asked you to count, well, how many days is your cycle? Are you 26 days, 28 days, 32 days? I'm asking you to count from the day 1 of bleeding all the way until the day 1 of your next period. That's what we're counting. So day 1 starts your follicular phase. And the reason we call it the follicular phase is on your ovaries, you have a lot of follicles. And follicles are basically a fancy word for a house with cells around it that hold the egg inside. And those cells make hormones, estrogen or progesterone, depending on what the brain decides. So in the first part, you are recruiting, growing, strengthening all these follicles because one of them has to release the egg at ovulation. And in that time frame, you will have a lot of estrogen, estradiol in particular. You're supposed to. Your estrogen is rising, and then you get to about the middle of your cycle. Now you're ready to ovulate. So you release the egg, and when you release that egg, now your cells start making more progesterone and a little bit of estrogen. And a lot of women don't realize this. They think, well, I must make estrogen and progesterone every single day, all the time. And it's actually not true. Your estrogen and progesterone follows what I call a controlled roller coaster. So your estrogen is up, then it's down, then it's up a little bit, whereas your progesterone is down, down, down. You release the egg, and then it goes up really high, like a big roller coaster, and then comes down again if you're not pregnant. So once you ovulate, that second half is called the luteal phase. And the reason it's called the luteal phase is those cells that make progesterone are called the corpus luteum. I don't know who named these things. I would have named them something, I always joke, like OPI nail polish, like something really fun and memorable. But we call it the corpus luteum, that structure, and it makes progesterone. And so if you are not pregnant, then gradually over the course of about 14 days-ish, those hormones drop. And that drop in hormone, because you can only pump out so many if you're not pregnant, will trigger your next period. If you are pregnant, then those hormones will stay up high because the act of implantation will tell the brain, hey, we're pregnant, keep pumping out those hormones for a while, and then eventually the baby's placenta will take over and make those hormones for you in the pregnant mom. So it's this, again, like I said, it's like a controlled roller coaster that goes up and down over the course of those, let's say, 28 days. Okay. But you can see, because the roller coasters go up, 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 they hit a point, and then they come down, 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 down. And that's every single day. So you're going a little bit up, a little bit up, a little bit up, a little, day by day. Sure. And then the next, and then all of a sudden, like a little down, a little down, a little down. And so it's no wonder women can sometimes feel crazy or that they're losing their mind. And they're like, I didn't change anything. I'm like, well, you didn't externally, but internally your roller coaster changed. And so that's affecting everything in your body.
Totally. Okay, so go into a little bit for us to understand, like, when someone's experiencing PMS symptoms or that roller coaster effect, because literally the hormones are in a roller coaster, what's going dysfunctional for some women to experience the side effects and other women to not? How would you explain that?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, remember the body is like a spider web. So if any part of a spider web gets plucked, the entire spider web vibrates. It's the same thing in your body. So we're talking about estrogens and progesterone, but it's going to affect your GI tract. It's going to affect your brain hormones, your neurotransmitters. It actually even affects your immune system. And so by understanding this, if you say, gosh, Carrie, when I get close to my period, I feel those symptoms. My GI tract I get more constipated. Or, gosh, when I get close to my period, I feel flu-like. I get weird immune system symptoms. Or, gosh, when I get close to my period, I get headaches, or I get depression, or I get anxiety. Remember, it's a spiderweb effect. And so by these estrogens and progesterones shifting in the right way or the wrong way, it is going to affect those hormones.
Gotcha.
So when we're looking at this roller coaster, we are predominantly looking in that luteal phase as we're leading up to your period. And ideally, you make absolute boatloads of progesterone, milligrams worth. And when I say milligrams, like if you think of your average supplement, you take 250 milligrams of magnesium, you take 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, you should be making 25 to 40 milligrams of progesterone. It's a lot of progesterone. Whereas your estrogen, your estradiol, you only make micrograms, so much smaller amounts, micrograms. The problem is if that changes, if you don't make enough progesterone, let's say instead of 25 to 40, you only make 10 or 5 milligrams, but you make double the amount of micrograms of estradiol that your body is like counting on, you're going to get this incredible imbalance between your estradiol and your progesterone. And our progesterone, historically, we call it our progestation hormone because it's important for pregnancy and implantation. However, that's not everyone's goal, but it is also important for calming, soothing, relaxing, feeling okay. It also helps you not have heavy, clotty periods. It also helps you with reduce water retention. Like we need good, normal, healthy levels of progesterone. Whereas estrogen is more that stimulating, growing, go, build, which is fine in normal, healthy amounts. But when it's excessive, now we're like, heavy periods, clotty periods, fibroids, polyps, full tender breasts, pain. And estrogen out of balance when it's elevated, can also cause us to feel the effects of things like histamine more. Histamine for people with allergies, we're familiar with the word histamine. Well, histamine, you may be getting close to your period and you think, why is my nose running? Why is my skin itchy? Why do I have all this gas and bloating, which can be histamine related? Why are my allergies worse? And just as I said earlier, the brain, depression, anxiety, anger, your estrogen and progesterone play a role in your brain. So if they're not in the ratios we want them or the amounts that we want them, it's going to affect serotonin, dopamine, GABA, glutamate, like all these neurotransmitters that we know play a role with mood, learning, focus, motivation, things like that. And so just by having those two little hormones out of balance, it can affect the whole system.
Okay, that was a beautiful description. So I hear constantly of women that are having to get on progesterone because their progesterone numbers are so low. So why do you think that is? Why is there this estrogen dominance or this too much estrogen? I know that we live in a society, unfortunately, of estrogen that can be in our plastics and our water and toxins that are infiltrating into our bloodstream. And so I'm sure you can go into that. But is that one of the factors or the triggers that's creating more estrogen, and then naturally you're going to have a lack of progesterone when estrogen is so high? Explain that a little bit.
It can. So when you make hormones of any kind, they're pulsed out. So they're not continuous. They're not like a garden hose where you turn on, or your kitchen sink, you turn on the water and it just comes out all the time. They're pulsed. Think of like a heartbeat, right? You get like a lub-dub and then a pause, and a lub-dub and then a pause. It's the same in your hormones. So that pulse, that signal is reactive to what's going on in the brain. And the brain is constantly scanning to make sure we're healthy enough, safe enough, well enough to become pregnant if we wanted to. And that can upset a lot of people who are like, well, I don't want to get pregnant. Like, I know, I don't want to get pregnant either. But the female body reproductively, that's how we're designed.
Right.
And if you want to get pregnant, then this is helpful also for you to know. So if there's a disruption in the force, if there is any kind of thing happening in the body, stress, new different medications, transitioning off medications, moves, job stuff, changing time zones, over-exercising, under-eating, illness, you've been sick lately, there's thyroid issues, other autoimmune immune stuff, the brain goes, this is not a good time to release the egg or to make healthy levels of progesterone, progestation, so I'm not going to. So either they don't ovulate at all, which is called anovulation, or they just don't make that much progesterone. Wow. They'll eke out some, but not great levels. And so they will often be put on progesterone or something to support progesterone, which I'm okay with as long as you're addressing the root cause.
Right.
Because oftentimes I get the question, I'm sure you do too, I have low progesterone, what's the one nutrient, what's the one herb, what's the one topical to get my progesterone up? And my question's always the same. Well, why is it down?
Right.
What happened, you know? And even it can be something really small as like, oh gosh, I was just in Europe for a week. It's huge time zone shift, came back, trying to catch up, stress. Okay, that makes sense. But it can be even really serious things. I mean, it can be, well, I got in a car accident. I have a concussion.
Okay.
All that communication starts in my brain. And if so, my brain is not happy, therefore the rest of my hormones are not happy. Or I started this new exercise program 6 months ago. You know, I'm working out a ton, trying to meet my goals, but now I'm thinking it might be too much. And so by backing up to like, oh, hold on, let's figure out why you're not making a lot of progesterone. That's where we ultimately want to start.
Okay, that's wonderful. And so tell me, like, diet, how that plays into the role of making more progesterone or healthy fats, omega-3s. Is there any, we get asked all the time, is there a precursor to progesterone? Is there something I'm lacking? Is there, is thyroid not working optimally to then have that downstreaming effect? So maybe go into that.
Yes, and the answer is yes to all of it. If you have hyper or hypothyroidism, so if you have been told you have hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, or the opposite, Graves' disease, because your thyroid plays a major role in your ovaries, they're best friends, it absolutely will have an influence. So especially, I see it more, and it's more common when you have a slower thyroid, hypothyroid, then it tends to slow down or affect your menstrual cycle as well. So you may find your cycles irregular, you may find you don't ovulate, you may find your periods are heavy because you have all this estrogen, but no progesterone to calm it down. So absolutely getting thyroid testing before somebody just says, oh, that's me, I'm going to go and, jump on the first thyroid supplement that I can find. Get testing first. Let's see what we're up against. But then when it comes to food, absolutely. So I mentioned like under eating before. And again, remember, now under eating can be a few different things. It can be you have a super busy life, meetings start at 8 a.m., you're trying to get your kids ready by 7 a.m., and you don't even stop till 5. I mean, I have friends who don't intentionally not eat in their day. They just don't have the time and haven't built it in.
That's so common within our store. That's actually almost every woman that comes in, even overweight or they'll look at me and they're like, you would think I eat a lot, but I don't. And that's actually the common story is under eating, not overeating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it can be extreme. You can have an actual disordered eating.
Right.
Where it's more of a, an eating disorder is what,
choice.
Most people, a choice, what we're familiar with. I do find in our society, sometimes it's a mix between the two. You just don't eat, but because you have a history of disordered eating, it's maybe easier for you or acceptable for you, just seeing that combination. Either way, it registers with the brain, lack of calories, lack of nutrients, and therefore it's going to oftentimes it will affect your menstrual cycle. And quality of food, you are what you eat and absorb. And so if you're eating foods that are not nutrient dense, they're kind of void of any kind of vitamins, minerals, nutrients, anything, that's not going to be that helpful because your entire body from head to toe works on vitamins, nutrients, healthy fats, minerals, etc. Those are the cofactors that make your body go round. Those are the cofactors that help you get from point A to point B. And you mentioned fat. So your cells, all of your cells have a lining around them called a lipid bilayer. Lipid, because phospholipids, healthy fat. We want our cells to be very fluid and able to receive hormones, or what we call fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A or E, or fat-soluble hormones like estradiol, progesterone, testosterone. But if you have stiff cells, think of like trying to get into like an old house with an old door, and you're trying to like push the stupid door open, and it's just really hard, versus a nice, healthy door that's been greased and then the door just opens. It's the same in your cell. And so if you evaluate the types of fats that you're eating, if you're doing a lot of fried foods, trans fats, as opposed to your omega-3s, or even like your olive oils, some of those, then it will make a difference, yes. But I will tell you, because you did ask, the backbone of all our reproductive steroid hormones, which is what we're talking about, is cholesterol. So you do have to eat enough of those, fats. If you have low cholesterol, it can cause a problem, potentially, with hormone production.
Thank you for throwing that in, because that's one of the things that people oftentimes hear. Oh, we don't want high cholesterol, so our society thinks, okay, then sometimes the opposite means better. And so low does not mean better. Cholesterol is, as you mentioned, is an antioxidant for the brain, an antioxidant for making our sex hormones and making us feel good within our own brains. And so I'm not a fan of driving cholesterol too low. So I'm happy that you mentioned that. So tell me, for listeners, like, what would be what blood test would you suggest, or would you suggest, testing at ovulation? Would you suggest testing multiple times a month? Because that is one of the things I think women get confused on. They go in and maybe they get a lab drawn at one time of the month, and I'll ask them, okay, so where were you at in your phase? Well, I don't know, they say, and I'm like, well, that's not going to be very conclusive in me helping you see where were you in your roller coaster, because there are times you should be lower, times you should be higher, and I need to know where you were at in your cycle. So what would your advice be in testing?
Yes. And this is so relatable to so many women, and they don't know. I had a really good friend a couple years ago say to me, my progesterone is near zero. I mean, it was like under 1. It was 0.5 or something. And she said, my doctor wants me to go on progesterone. And I said, well, where were you in your cycle? And she said, I don't know. It was like Tuesday at 3:00. And I went to the lab, and it turned out she was on her period. And I said, it's supposed to be that low. That's normally when it's low. So I'm so glad you said that. When we do estradiol is what we're looking at, estradiol and progesterone testing, we tend to look in the luteal phase. We want your blood draw to be about 5 to 7 days after ovulation. If you don't know if you ovulate, there's a couple things you can do. One, you can do ovulation predictor kits. Whether you're trying to get pregnant or not, we're just using it for, science purposes. They're little urine strips you buy at the grocery store or a pharmacy or online, and you pee on them in the morning. And when it's positive, it means you're probably about to ovulate. So they're called LH strips, or ovulation predictor strips. And they're measuring a hormone called LH. The higher LH is, you're pretty close. You're probably going to ovulate soon. Once that's positive, if you do the strips, then 5 to 7 days later, plan out your blood draw or whatever test you're doing. Now, there are other ways. If you notice that your mucus is changing, it shows up and becomes much more stretchy. Some women feel ovulation. They'll say, oh my gosh, in the middle of my cycle, I get like little twinges in the pelvic area. I'll get a little ache to let me know that I ovulated. Around ovulation, our testosterone bumps up a little bit, often. Not always. So some women will go, oh yeah, I feel a little saucier at that time. I feel, a little sexier. I'm ready for some action at that time. I'm like, well, probably gonna ovulate soon. It's designed. And so that's helpful to know. So 5 to 7 days after ovulation is ideal when we're checking those two markers. Yeah. Now the other markers, let's say you're like, I should probably check my thyroid, and it's been a while since I've checked iron, or like I've never had my vitamin D. Just do it all at the same time. Just do it all at the same time and be consistent. And it's that way, it's only one blood draw, which is great.
I love that. That was so helpful, so helpful. So let's just dive into, now that we're getting to this part, some remedies. So let's dive into some of your favorite remedies, some by New Ethics, some in general that you would just like to talk about. Because I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, just as a reminder, that, you know, one of the biggest positions in your life now is working with New Ethics, which is a very, very, very scientific based formulation company, herbal company, and nutrient company. And we're honored to have it on our shelves at our store, and it's growing in sales. And I think it's doing so for good reason. It's a great company. So let's hop into some remedies now.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big first ones I always make sure that people have is just, you know, like quality multivitamin, quality B vitamin, or a supplement in it that has those Bs. Vitamin B6 in particular, B6 and B5 are really helpful in women's health. And so the New Ethics product called Menstrual Ease, which I'll talk about in a second, has that in there. But let me talk about why. So when you need to make hormones, when you're making brain hormones, when you're processing hormones, vitamin B6 plays a major role. And so we often find that women don't get enough in their body, or they can't absorb it very well. Maybe they're struggling with gas or bloating or constipation, things in the GI tract, and they're just, you know, maybe they're eating it, but they're just not absorbing well. So we need to add in a little extra to help them through everything they're going through. And B6 also helps us make GABA. GABA is our calming neurotransmitter in our brain. And so if we don't feel calm, adding a little extra B6 may help that process happen. Vitamin B5, along with vitamin C, are really helpful for our adrenal glands. And so our adrenal glands manage our stress. And as we get close to our period and we're feeling PMSy, stress hits us harder than our male counterparts. Their testosterone is pretty much the same all the time. They wake up in the morning, the testosterone ideally is high, and then it goes down, and it's the same day after day after day after day, ideally. Whereas we shift a little bit every day over 28 days, and then we start over. So when we are feeling stress, as we get closer to our periods, we become more sensitive to it, right? Like what we could have handled last week, this week we're ready to, go crazy. And so adding in that vitamin B5 and that vitamin C can be a real game changer for a lot of people. And then when we talk about herbs, my favorite herb is called chaste tree, or Vitex, Vitex agnus castus. And New Ethics has a liposomal chaste tree all by itself, or they have included it in the Menstrual Ease, which is their PMS product. Chaste tree essentially is an herb that helps work at the brain level. And so what it does predominantly, it does a couple things. I call it like an adaptogen for the ovaries. So we know about adaptogens with stress. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of ashwagandha or rhodiola or ginseng. Those are adaptogens for the adrenal glands. The chaste tree is more an adaptogen for the ovaries. So it helps improve brain signaling down to the ovaries to really support the progesterone production, but it can also help support proper estrogen production as well. It also can lower prolactin. So prolactin we think about with our breastfeeding hormone. It's our prolactation hormone. But you can have, even like if you have hypothyroidism, you're more prone to slightly elevated levels of prolactin, high stress, lack of or loss of vitamin B6. All those cause prolactin to go up a little bit. Worst case scenario, there are tumors that can produce prolactin. But let's say best case scenario, it's B6 issues or thyroid or stress. What does prolactin do when it's mildly elevated? Well, the body goes, what am I doing? Am I breastfeeding? Am I not breastfeeding? I don't know. I'm just going to throw everything off. And that's how we feel leading up to our cycle. So chaste tree can help dial that back in, get that back to where it needs to be while supporting progesterone and estrogen. And so by adding in super nutrients, go ahead.
How would someone take that? Would it be all month long, or would they just want to take it when they feel the symptoms? Explain that.
So ideally, chaste tree is done all month long. So I stack. So if somebody says to me, I'm having low progesterone, I don't ovulate, I have terrible PMS, we do chaste tree all month long, along with nutrients. But as we get close up to the PMS time, then I use the New Ethics Menstrual Ease, because it also has a number of other products in it that support lowering inflammation, reducing cramps, reducing swelling, all the things that kind of you complain of in a certain time frame, as opposed to maybe all 28 days. And so we can stack the products. Now, some women really only need at least that PMS time. Some women are like, man, I feel great 3 weeks of the month. It's that fourth week that sucks. I'm like, okay, then let's just do that, the extra B vitamins and menstrual E's, maybe some omegas, get that healthy fat in there in that PMS time frame. But remember, it's a whole cycle, and the cycle starts day one.
Right.
So whatever you do when your lifestyle changes, your diet, your exercise, your basic nutrition, your basic supplements, you do want to do those kind of every day and support the cycle every day.
Okay, that's so helpful. And then tell just a little bit more what's in the Menstrual Ease product, just so we can know some of those great ingredients and how they're kind of working.
Yeah, so it does have vitamin B5, it has vitamin C, it does have vitamin B6, it does have a little bit of chaste tree, it has other support, it has a traditionally used Chinese medicine mushroom called poria, which is helpful for lowering inflammation, reducing cramps. It's been studied even in like menstrual cramps. It has ginger in it. Ginger, believe it or not, is what we call like the spice of the uterus. It's warming. It's helpful for reducing inflammation in there. It's helpful for reducing cramps in there. It's got a little bit of licorice in there. Licorice helps us with harmonizing hormones, helping with stress management. And again, all of these are a little bit that play well together, as opposed to like one, like 1,000 milligrams that's just going to hit you over the head. It's enough that as a group, right? As a group, a combination product that you can take it leading up to your cycle, and it is a great in the moment. It's a great Band-Aid to cover all the bases that you're feeling.
Wonderful. Okay. And then, not to throw such a loaded question here kind of as at the end as we're wrapping up, but if a female was on birth control pills and it was just to help their PMS issues, it wasn't for, say, birth control reasons or other reasons, but they were told to get on this birth control, do you see that as helpful generally, or what is your advice when women come to you on that? And I know, again,
yes,
they could go back to their traditional OBs and have this conversation, but like, just what are your thoughts into this a little bit more?
So I will say, I'm glad we have the birth control pill. I'm glad we have an option for birth control pill for women. When it comes to PMS, though, it is not my first line therapy, because I feel I have, just like you, I have so many other options. If they're not using the birth control pill for true birth control or something else severe where I need it in the moment, like my severe endometriosis patients, severe pain, like things where I'm like, wow, we need a Band-Aid, we need it right now. That's the birth control pill. It is a heavy hitting baseball bat.
Yeah.
But if somebody says, I'm like, well, why are you on the pill? And they're like, oh, I just had PMS. I'm like, oh, I feel like there's such better options. And I have so many women in my social media comments who were like, gosh, I just made easy changes. Nothing super expensive, nothing super crazy. I evaluated the chemicals in my life, which we touched on. I evaluated how I'm sleeping because I wasn't. I evaluated the stress in my life. I made some dietary improvements, added in some nutrients, and my PMS got exponentially better. And they didn't have the side effects of the birth control pill, because while I am not against the birth control pill, in theory, it has a host of side effects. And I was just talking to an OBGYN yesterday, and she and I were saying how the birth control pill depletes so many nutrients. And the list is very long. It's like a multivitamins worth of nutrients the birth control depletes.
And especially the B vitamins, which you were speaking about, are so vital for the mental health. Yeah, all of them.
Pretty much all of them. I have pharmacy friends, and I'm like, why don't you recommend a quality multivitamin when you hand out the birth control pill? And they're like, it's not standard practice.
I know.
The warning label is there that it depletes, a lot of nutrients, but it's not standard practice to go, hey, you should probably get a multivitamin. So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh gosh, I have been on the birth control pill for 5 years or 10 years, be aware you should probably come talk to Katie and get a quality multivitamin, because
most definitely
you are probably really depleted in it. And that alone might make a huge difference in any side effects that you're feeling. Because when you deplete your B vitamins, when you deplete your minerals, it just sort of like falls apart. You need those things to make your body go round.
You do. And so for the women listening, what timeline do you try to give it for women? Because I have some that want that, effect within a week or 2 weeks. And I always try to tell them, like, we're working kind of cycle at a time. So we've got to get everything in for a good 30 days. And then we're looking for the future cycles. So we're looking a cycle or two down the road. So just explain kind of your timeline with when you're working on this. Yeah.
Are you ready? It's 3 months at a minimum.
Okay. Yeah, I thought
so.
2 to 3.
Here's why. I can give you the science why this might be helpful for everyone listening. When you have one follicle that you only release, unless you're having twins or triplets or something, you only release one follicle, one egg releases a month. So it's like the grand queen follicle, and she has to grow and get groomed and, chosen and the whole thing. But it takes 3 months for your body to start recruiting what we call preantral follicles and grow them up into one chosen queen.
Wow.
So that means I need to affect the health of the follicles 3 months ago because the queen who was chosen for this month, she's already been through everything you've been through. She's already been through your exercise plan, your diet, your chemicals, your vices,
Gotcha.
Your stress, your travel. Like, we can do the best we can, and we are. But remember, at a 3 month minimum, I want those baby follicles pulled up into queendom and really healthy.
Gotcha. That's
so
a great
it's a 3 month
description.
minimum.
Okay, thank you. I think that'll help people that are listening to know not to give up on their changes so soon, and that it's important to stick with it and really reassess after those 90 days. So this was wonderful. I so enjoyed this.
I will say this last factoid too before we wrap up, but your ovaries are sisters, not twins. Now I realize twins are sisters, but it's also possible that righty and lefty don't do the same thing every month. So you may be listening to this in August and have one type of cycle, and in September you have a different type of cycle, and then you may flip back and forth. You're right, then left, then right, then left might go, or you may have a dominant ovary. So you may feel the same symptoms 3 or 4 months in a row, and then you have a rogue period. And you're like, where did this rogue period? Or why do I get this migraine, but only a couple times a year? Absolutely. It could be outside forces, diet, lifestyle, etc. Or it could be your ovaries have shifted to the other side. So I have advised women all the time, track your symptoms so you can get a really good idea. Do your symptoms stay consistent month to month? Do they flip back and forth? Do they have a pattern? 3 months of good, 1 month of bad. 3 months of bad, 1 month of good. So while I say it does take 3 months to recruit and build up and get health of an ovary, you have 2 ovaries. And so it is going to take you longer than a week to make profound changes.
Totally.
I wish it was faster.
I know.
I would totally give everyone the easy button if I could, or the magic supplement. If I had a magic fix-it-all supplement, you and I would not hold back. We would just we'd hand it out like candy.
We would, especially when we know how it feels to have bad PMS. But I also can be on the other side to know that holding on through those 3 months is worth it because you can get to the other side and feel so great. So thank you so much, Dr. Carrie. This was so wonderful. I so enjoyed our time, and I hope our listeners got a lot out of this. My passion is always to spread more help for women and get this across the country because I think we all deserve to live our absolute best feeling lives, and that is possible. And so thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yes.